Hey there Wargamers, and welcome back to another Wargames Delivered video. In this video, we're going to be Zenithal highlighting with an airbrush. Let's get started. So to preface this video, I'm not really doing a how to airbrush here. It's more of just how to Zenithal prime, and we'll go over how to airbrush in depth a little bit later on in the channel. So we've got matte gray here, some airbrush medium. That's going to be our first step, is to cover the model with the matte gray, and we've also got matte white. And these are the key components for just a very basic, rudimentary Zenithal highlight. And if you're new to airbrushing, I have a gravity feed airbrush here. This is pretty much what you'll want to go for if you're a miniature painter. As you can see, I've used it quite a bit. It usually comes looking like it does on the outside, on the inside. And usually when you're basing, you'll want to do between 10 to 15 psi on your air compressor. So to start us off, we've got Sansa Stark from the A Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game here, and we're going to start with her. I did leave my lights a little bit too bright for this video, so I do apologize for that, but you will be able to see the difference in the end. So starting off here, we're going to put just a little bit of our airbrush cleaner in and mix it together. Usually when you put your finger in front of it or a paper towel and push it through, it just kind of bubbles, and that creates a nice, it's also a very nice way to mix your paints. Also a very good way to just agitate everything in the airbrush and get everything working. Always be sure to clean your airbrush as soon as, or after you're done using it. It's the #1 key to keeping it clean. And we're going to start here with our matte gray for our first layer on our prime here. And you just want a couple drops. You don't need that much to get a really nice color on them. As you can see, I just kind of fill that very bottom reservoir. You can absolutely fill it more if you're doing more models. I just have 2 here, so I figured this would be more than enough for what we're doing here. And now we're going to add a couple of drops of the airbrush medium in here. Usually you want to go about half of what you put in of paint to airbrush medium. I went a little bit heavy there, but that's okay. If you go a little bit heavy, that's better than not going over. Unless, you know, you can go a little bit too far. If your paint's too thin, you'll have that spider webbing effect. You can kind of see that on my piece of cardboard palette here. And always take a brush and mix your colors together in the airbrush itself. You can absolutely mix outside of your airbrush and transfer colors in if you have a syringe of some kind, but honestly, you can mix it in the airbrush. It's not too big of a deal. I'm going to add a little bit more matte brown or matte gray in here to even it out with the medium that I put in. And you're looking for about that consistency here. Pretty watery, but nice solid color of the matte gray all the way through. If you have too much of the medium, it will tend to kind of lighten the color down a little bit. We started with the brush, and now we're just kind of mixing it with some air pressure here as well. And now to start off, I always like to test it on something before the model. So just use the palette here, and as you can see, we're starting to get some nice color come through there. And the way I like to work is kind of bottom up with the first layer, and then top down with our Zenithal. So you'll see that in the later steps. But for now, we're just trying to get a nice even coat over the model here with just one pass. And you can absolutely do this with rattle cans or primer cans. I live in Northwest Ohio, where it is always humid and never a good time to use rattle cans. So this is the best way that I've found for me to base my miniatures. And you can also do a lot of fun and interesting things with the airbrush as well. And as you can see, we're slowly but surely building a nice matte gray layer on the model here. Does take time. Usually I do about 2 passes over the entire thing. And I kind of just work sporadically, go over the model, just kind of look at it and see what needs it, what parts need color, and just add it where necessary. If you encounter any jams in your airbrush or color not coming through, that's typically because you have just a lot of excess paint right by the well that's blocking it. What you can do is just go in with a brush and kind of mix things around, especially where the needle and the chute are. That's a really important spot to clean off, and if that still doesn't do it, you might have to go in and just completely clean the whole thing. But you can never clean your airbrush too much. That is the best way to get years and mileage out of it. So always, always, always clean your airbrush after every use. And as you can see on the other model, the Rob Stark model, these models are made out of like a blue plastic, which depending on the color can make it pretty difficult to see how much paint you're applying and how much of the original plastic is covered. But we'll give you a side-by-side here shortly, and that'll give you a nice idea of when your model has a nice first layer on it or not. And it takes a bit of time, but as you can see, we're starting to get a nice even layer all the way across the model. Not much of the original blue is shining through, so that's about where I would call it. Just hitting some last-minute areas and details here. Alright, and so as you can see with the side-by-side, it is entirely 100% covered here. So we will go ahead and switch over to our next step, which will be cleaning out our airbrush and switching over to the matte white. Now this is just a quick clean, I would say. There's a more in-depth and better way to clean your airbrush, but when you're just going in between colors, this is how I like to do it. Fill the airbrush with the airbrush cleaner, and then go in with a brush and just kind of get off all of those chunks that kind of collected there from, you know, continued use of the airbrush. This can take some time, you know, just work it around with an old brush, you know, one that you don't really care about too much, and then wipe it out with a paper towel. And we will switch over to our Zenithal highlight step, which will be taking the matte white, and we're just going to add a couple of drops in here. We do not need half as much as we had of the matte gray, because we're not going to cover the entire model with this. We're just going to hit basically from the top down. So if you can imagine like a 45-degree angle around the head of the model, looking from the top, that's kind of where you want to hit it. And the point of this is to leave some of the original gray that we had established earlier shining through, so that you have some nice established shadows and highlights on the model. And you can use the matte black instead if you'd like a more stark contrast on the model. No pun intended with the models we're using here. I'm just kind of going for a little bit more of a subtle one here with the gray to the white. And the best thing I've found to keep in mind when you're doing this step is to just imagine where the light would be hitting the model. You can take a sort of yellow light and kind of aim it at the model and see where the sun would hit it if it was outside, and work from that. That's kind of your outline and guideline for where to apply the highlight on the model. And as you can see here, we're building up a nice contrast between the top of the model and the bottom of the model. In the side-by-side here, you'll get to see the real difference between her and Rob Stark, because he's just got the gray as of right now. We'll go ahead and give you that side-by-side right here. And as you can tell, a little bit of that gray on the bottom and on the inner details is poking through, but we have a nice highlight on the top there of the model. Alright, and so we're going to do the exact same thing to clean this as we did with the matte gray to start off. So what we did is just take a little bit of the airbrush cleaner and an old brush and work it in there, dump out the excess cleaner and spray the excess out of the airbrush, and rinse and repeat this step until everything that's coming out of the airbrush is translucent. At that point, you'll want to take your airbrush apart, and we'll give a better video and more in-depth video on how to clean your airbrush a little bit later on. But for just changing colors, that's pretty much all you need to do. To really clean your airbrush, you'll want to take it all the way apart, take the needle out, and really give it a good cleaning with some airbrush cleaner. But that will do it for our video today, guys. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to check out the top link in the description below for the giveaway. Happy wargaming, guys.